Hi everyone, today we're going to look into the history of malaria as well as the life cycle of the malaria parasite and certain key prominent stages within that life cycle. So let's get started. Now, the disease malaria dates back to 2700 BC and it has been recorded in many Chinese medical records. And the parasite itself was discovered in 1880s by Alphonse Laverne, and the discovery had coincided with an improved ability to examine the blood under the microscope. However, mosquitoes were identified as vectors much later in 1897, and it was done so by Ronald Ross. Now, the term malaria refers to bad air, and it is in Italian. And initially, this was because it was thought that the disease malaria happened due to bad air from swamps, from essentially equatorial regions or hot regions. Moving on, let's go into the parasite life cycle, and this part is in humans, the parasite life cycle in humans. Something that we really have to note about the malaria parasite life cycle is that it's divided into two stages, one that's in humans and one that's in the mosquito. And first we're going to examine the life cycle that is in humans. Now what happens is if we are bitten by a mosquito, the parasite enters the blood, and then in the bloodstream it travels to the liver, and in the liver it displays one of the fastest multiplications in nature, and it multiplies continually. And what happens is it infects red blood cells. And this stage where we are infecting the RBCs and where the parasite is actually in the bloodstream is the stage that causes the most symptoms. And in this stage, we get a lot of symptoms due to male and female gametocytes. And then we get the second infected mosquito. The second infected mosquito essentially just draws blood up from the bloodstream, which contains a lot of male and female gametocytes, and then it infects another individual. Now, the second part of the parasite life cycle begins in mosquitoes, and what happens is the parasite develops in the infected RBC, and it changes into male and female gametocytes through the stage of meiosis. And so from then on, the mosquito draws blood in, and what happens is fertilization. The gametocytes essentially mate together in the mosquito midgut. And it produces fertilization, therefore occurs in the midgut, and then it produces oocysts, which then mature and then turn into sporozoites. And this is the form that infects humans, and this is essentially transported to the salivary gland, where the salivary gland essentially is the part where the mosquito ejects the sporozoites as it draws blood up from another individual. Right, so this is the red blood cell stage within the malaria parasite life cycle, and this is probably the most dangerous and the most symptom-causing stage of the life cycle. And this is the stage that involves the most intervention methods as of today, and it's a 48-hour cycle, and one merozoite essentially goes from 16 to 32. So it multiplies really rapidly. And so what happens is when the parasite moves out of the liver, it attaches to another red blood cell and it re-engineers that red blood cell by changing its chemistry, and it takes over that red blood cell and uses its hemoglobin as a source of amino acid in order to replicate itself further. So it replicates, and as you can see, it bursts out of that red blood cell and then goes back into the bloodstream. Right, in terms of kind of classifying malaria severity, we can classify the disease malaria into two types of severities. First is uncomplicated malaria, where we don't have a lot of symptoms. Well, we do have a lot of symptoms like sweating, chills, dry cough, or even enlargement of the spleen, but these are certain less intense symptoms compared to severe malaria, which involves other cases like jaundice, black urine, and the massive hemolysis. So what happens in uncomplicated malaria is the spleen essentially clears the blood from parasite infection, and therefore in the spleen it fills up with debris from the parasite, and therefore the spleen enlarges essentially. In your head you get a lot of headaches, and some other systemic sort of symptoms that you get is fever, and in terms of some muscular conditions that you might get, you might feel a little bit of pain and fatigue, and a lot of chills and sweating would be involved in uncomplicated malaria. In severe malaria, which is much more intense than uncomplicated malaria in terms of the severity of the symptoms, you get cases like jaundice or black urine or massive hemolysis, and this one usually occurs a lot in children, and it is much more dangerous in terms of the danger or the risk that it entails, because severe malaria is much more associated to death rates rather than uncomplicated malaria.